Hello and welcome to a special episode of the British Broadcasting Century podcast. Stepping out of our moment-by-moment timeline, which for now sees us just finishing the first year of the BBC's life in November 1923, we leap forward 30-ish years to the 1950s, a time when the BBC produced its first ever documentary on homosexuality. They thought it was so controversial they banned it immediately. It sat on a shelf for 3 years. It was finally broadcast in 1957. That recording was lost. But in the BBC Written Archive Centre, a transcript survived, found by Professor Marcus Collins, delivered to Dr. Stephen Hornby, who adapted it into a stage play, the BBC's first homosexual. It's had 5-star reviews all over the shop. It's been on a sellout tour of England, and now it's the turn of Ireland and Scotland. It visits Dublin this May, it visits Edinburgh this August for the Fringe Festival. We speak to Marcus and Stephen this episode. The BBC's first homosexual, here on the British Broadcasting Century.
Hello, this is Paul Carenza calling.
This is London Calling.
Hello, welcome to the podcast. I'm Paul Carenza. Thank you for joining us here on episode 117 of the British Broadcasting Century. Sandwiched between our last episode, which was concluding the BBC's first year, November 1923, we've reached in our regular moment-by-moment timeline. We'll continue that in about 3 episodes' time and pick up the tale from there, the start of the second year of the BBC's life. But a couple of specials between now and then. Next time is the centenary of the General Strike, 1926. So we'll do an episode or two looking at the BBC's role in that and how it changed the BB going forward from there. But this episode, we're in the 1950s. Yes, leaping ahead, for us at least, but leaping back for many, to a unique time of social history. It's post-war, and modern Britain is grappling with sexual politics. A new play has been touring the land, giving an insight into the BBC's first documentary on male homosexuality. But bosses immediately frowned upon it. It sat on a shelf for quite some time, and it was on a shelf in the BBC Written Archive Centre that Professor Marcus Collins, Professor of British History at Loughborough University, discovered it and thought, well, this needs bringing back to life. And that's where Dr. Stephen Hornby of the University of Salford steps in. We'll chat to Professor Marcus Collins and Dr. Stephen Hornby after this extract of this new play on tour to Dublin and Edinburgh soon, the BBC's first homosexual.
Broadcast it? Well, that word would be said in the homes of the nation, in their parlours and living rooms, in front of families.
Well, I'm not suggesting after hymns for Sunday. We need a late-night slot in a serious adult context.
It would still be broadcast from the same speaker the Queen's voice is heard from on Christmas Day.
Well, if that's to be the bloody
I mean,
test.
such a word would never have been spoken in the homes of English families.
I rather think it might have been in a few.
It would be a landmark moment.
Historic.
But is it D-Day or Dunkirk?
Delighted to welcome to the podcast now 2 wonderful guests. Firstly, a multi-award-winning writer, director and researcher who dramatises archives, lecturer in drama and theatre practice at the University of Salford, Dr. Stephen Hornby. Thank you for joining us, Stephen. And we also have Professor Marcus Collins, who's Professor of British History at Loughborough University. Thank you both for being here to talk about this marvellous play. What I love about this combo is that we have a lecturer in drama and a professor of history. Drama, history unite. So, Marcus, would you tell us the history part and we can leap to the drama part?
So, I mean, like you, I'm a bit of an habitué of the BBC Written Archive Centre. And I've, over the years, found a whole bunch of scripts and transcripts, which I've thought, it's such a shame that they are just on the page. These are old programmes where the recordings have been lost or were never made in the first place. And one of these things was a transcript I found looking for something quite different about the homosexuality in the 1950s. And so this was in a file labelled Sexual Offences, 1953 to 1954. And it was just listed in the BBC Written Archives catalogue, and I was just intrigued. I thought, what could the BBC possibly say about sex, let alone sexual offences, in the early 1950s? And it turned out that the BBC was deeply unsure of this very question.
Well, it looks like we have already, a bit. Said it, a bit, sorry.
Never. Radio or the idiot box?
Both.
Never.
Impromptu discussion on In the News 3 days ago, 27th of November 1953.
Really?
Discussing Sir John Gielgud's arrest.
Ballet actors.
And on radio, Any questions covered the same topic, but linked it to the arrest of Lord Montague?
Bally aristocrats.
Though they managed to avoid actually saying the word.
Free to be said by a familiar voice. A BBC voice.
What, for the BBC to say the word?
Yes. I mean, no.
Unthinkable?
Unsayable.
They had got interested in the possibility of broadcasting something about homosexuality, really as a way of putting the record straight in a good BBC kind of way, in contrast to the sort of tabloid sensationalist reporting of these various scandals that were happening. There were a bunch of court cases in 1953, 54, involving some quite high-profile figures, and the tabloids were going to town on this. Some of the broadsheets were taking a more august view and saying, oh, isn't this terrible? Not because these people were having sex, but because they shouldn't be criminalised for having sex with other men in the first place. And so there was this sort of polarised debate going on in the press and to some extent in Parliament. And the BBC jumped in, but it jumped in very, very cautiously. So it thought, OK, we will try to do a good BBC service of recording a programme about homosexuality. And as the BBC, we can be balanced and impartial and serious about such an important subject. But equally, as the BBC, we can't actually broadcast about this because there is this long shadow of Lord Reith and the idea of the BBC as being the sort of conscience of the nation. And if in doubt, leave it out was the motto of the BBC in terms of sexual content. So they thought, we will record a programme about homosexuality, we'll invite all of the great and the good, all the experts, all of the lawyers and clergymen and politicians who have something to say about it, but we will record it as an experimental programme, which is not for broadcast. And that's exactly what they did. Then the Director General decided with this and another programme which had been recorded at roughly the same time, also about homosexuality, to veto their broadcast. He said, great, fine, that was an experiment, but it's an experiment which should come to an end. And so what you have in the archive is the transcript of the original programme, which was recorded in 1954. And then also there was a strange afterlife to this programme, which is that the Wolfenden Commission on Homosexuality and Prostitution was appointed in 54 and reported in 1957, at which point the BBC thought that because this is now a government matter and a matter of sort of public interest that can be talked about in Parliament, we have sanction to broadcast about homosexuality. So they then disinterred this programme, re-edited it, and broadcast a version of it in 1957. So I came across this. I thought the contents of this programme are very interesting, but I also thought that the story of this programme, how it was originally devised, then vetoed, and how eventually it was revived, was a tale in itself.
This is the BBC Home Service. In recent weeks, C.R. Hewitt has been seeking the opinion of a number of informed men and women on the subject of the homosexual condition. This evening, he presents a report on his investigations, a study of opinion on a social problem.
So, Stephen, then at some point, Marcus approaches you with this idea, presumably, this research. What's your memory of how it came about from your conversation with Marcus?
Well, I was intrigued to read the transcript, fascinated to get hold of a little window back into that time and to the attitudes of that period. And it's mostly full of nonsense, from overtly homophobic viewpoints to to viewpoints that at the time would have been relatively progressive, but to our eyes still read as fairly homophobic to a modern audience.
There's a basic bifurcation in terms of the approach to curing homosexual behaviour. Either the impulse remains and the homosexual is given strategies so that it remains unacted upon, or the impulse itself becomes amenable to treatment.
So much depends on why a man is seeking a cure. If he comes because he wants to be able to fall in love with a woman, then perhaps there's a lot you can do.
So my dilemma really was, well, what can I do with this? It's not material that it feels very productive to simply be restaging in its current form. I think Marcus had already identified the potential for a story behind the scenes, the idea of that journey. He'd also, in addition to the transcript, there's various pieces of correspondence internally in the BBC that give you the basics of a drama, in that there are some people who want to get the programme made and there are some people who oppose the programme being made. And so you've got some conflict and you've got a journey over time from 1953, when it first starts being talked about, through to July 1957, when the final version of the programme is broadcast. So you've got some opportunity for characters to evolve and change over that time. So it felt like there was a behind the scenes story, but what was I going to do with the material itself? That was a kind of dramaturgical problem for me, until I thought up the idea of, well, I'm less interested in simply reproducing, offensive views from the period, and I'm more interested in what the potential impact of those could have been. So what would it do to someone to hear these debated in this way for the first time? So I invented a character called Tom, who's sort of a 19-year-old tailor working in Burton's, a very ordinary working class guy. And I imagined him going on the journey of the period in terms of his sexuality and the likely ways he'd be able to understand and express that. And then also thinking about the broadcast and when that arrives in his life and what potential impact that could have on him.
So, I having seen the production myself in London, I was struck by the way that you had really given us a sense of Britain at the time in the 1950s, and this character Tom, the journey he's going through in terms of sexuality in that time. But I really felt immersed in that era, in that period, from his perspective. At the same time as we're discovering the BBC making this documentary, it really felt like a personal angle on it that you found there. So I must congratulate you for finding a way in that really connected with us, and I gained that empathy.
The bits we did retain, so with the kind of, I hate to use the word expert, but that's how they're sort of portrayed, with the expert testimonies, I had some choices about how I dealt with those, really. And what I felt I wanted to do was present the bare minimum we could, give us enough to get the sense of, well, some people thought this and some people thought that. Some people felt that it was a case of arrested development. Some people felt that it was amenable to treatment, to change people. Some people thought that you could be influenced into homosexuality in some kind of cult. Other people felt that you should be abstinent and kind of satisfy yourself with religious service. So to try and get what the main dominant views are as briefly as possible, really. We don't use anyone's name specifically from the original transcript because that feels unfair to them, because I kind of changed it so much, really, that you wouldn't really want to attribute it to any one person. But hopefully I've managed to capture the essence of what their viewpoint was without pointlessly just giving pages and pages of homophobic treatises on stage for no apparent reason, really.
I could see this sort of, what we now think of as BBC balance seems to be quite lacking in the makeup of this seeming debate at the time. But
it's extraordinary. The exclusion now, we had the sort of mantra, nothing about us without us. And you would expect a documentary about any given subject to be full of people who have lived experience of it. Whereas here, the opposite almost seems to apply in terms of the headset, that we don't want, special pleading from minority groups. We want legal and moral experts. So the only person who speaks that acknowledges homosexual experience is someone who says, I've been cured and you can be cured too. So that's the only representation we get, direct representation we get within the programme. So it's far from an affirmative view of homosexuality. And of course, at this point, we need, I'm sure, I don't need to be telling you this, but the BBC is the kind of voice of the nation. It's a kind of mono media. ITV's only just sort of getting going at this point in the 50s. And so what they say have an incredible authoritative weight.
I think you need also to consider what exactly the BBC is trying to balance. So they're not trying to create a balance clearly between heterosexual authority figures and gay guys. They're not doing that. They're also actually not trying to balance particularly the balance between people who were in favour of decriminalisation and those people who wished the law to stay as it was. So you have a set of small L liberal producers who are taking this idea of public service broadcasting in a Arethian mould and turning it to progressive political causes. By its own light, this documentary is quite a liberal programme. It's presented by somebody who went on to chair the Homosexual Law Reform Society. It includes a lot of people who have similar attitudes to himself. There are some people who are in favour of criminalisation. On the original programme, there was Lord Hailsham, the barrister and Tory MP, who very much was of that persuasion. They also tried to recruit Mary Whitehouse onto the programme before she was a household name, but who had initially made a name for herself, talking about how the mothers of Britain should endeavour not to turn their sons gay. So they tried to have some balance in the sense of having some people opposed to decriminalisation. But what I think is strange from our point of view, and most alarming from our point of view, is that the liberal figures, the apparently progressive figures, are often the people who are most convinced that gay people can be cured, that they can be saved in some kind of way. And so the term homophobic, the way that we understand it, it applies to everybody in the programme. So it's imbalanced towards a progressive view, but that progressive view is in turn one that encompasses the idea of homosexuality as being fundamentally defective and therefore in need of correction.
The content can feel alien to us of its time, but it's very much a heartfelt thing, isn't it? It's when you've built up this fictitious character of Tom, so that by the time Tom actually hears this broadcast that we see being prepared at the time, it's a real gut punch when he finally actually listens to it. And I certainly felt that great awareness of the effect of anything we broadcast on a listener in that moment. So that's something that I really took from it as well.
Well, I think the connection we're trying to make at that point is that importance of how we internalize things and how self-hatred can be fueled by listening to voices of authority speaking in that way, and what the consequences of that can be. And I think you can look at that throughout the 50s and you can look at it today and you can see how that internalized self-hatred from figures of authority can corrode people and affect how they function in the world. And I think that operates exactly in the same way today as it did in 1954 to Tom listening, 1957 to Tom listening to the broadcast, to someone reading a homophobic tweet or response to their social media post on Instagram today. I think that process of attack and internalization is exactly the same emotionally.
This idea of lived experience has to be taken seriously, but everybody's experiences are conditioned by their society. And so in terms of gay guys in the 1950s, they were also starved of information with which to understand their own experience. And so I think that what comes out in the play is the damage that ignorance and prejudice can do. And that ignorance and prejudice can also be held by the people who it hurts most badly.
Bennett's! It's the name of a bar in an old hotel in town. It's a bit run down. You'd never think of going there unless you had to. Well, that weekend I do go. It's more run down than I thought. There's an old woman on a sort of reception.
Are you here for the back bar?
She says. It sounds like an accusation. I'm not ready to be put on the spot. Yes.
This play, it's full of Stephen's humour, and there are lots of comedic moments. There are many tragic moments in it as well, and it's that kind of tension between the two, which I think makes this play that Stephen's produced so affecting.
Well, absolutely. And I think I thought it was very funny when it needed to be, and very heartfelt and moving when it needed to be as well. So I highly recommend it, really. And of course, on this podcast, generally often it's been the interwar period, but we love to leap ahead as well. And for anyone who loves their broadcasting history, definitely seek this out, because you will get that insight into the BBC then and the way things were done in officialdom, as well as this really incisive social history and in terms of the history of homosexuality in Britain.
And from your point of view, I mean, you are fundamentally interested in the interwar BBC, and it's not the case that there was no mention of homosexuality before the war. There were things bubbling to the surface. So there were a whole bunch of Bloomsbury group intellectuals in particular, who had connections with some of the BBC employees who were themselves gay or lesbian, and who had a strong interest in this topic and sometimes a personal interest in this topic. And so they would sometimes kind of put in surreptitious references to homosexuality in programmes. And there were also people who venerated Oscar Wilde and Edward Carpenter and Havelock Ellis. And so you would get these peculiar programmes in the 30s and during the war that talked about those figures as these, sex reformers who were sort of prophetic from their point of view, but they had prophesized a time of sexual liberation which had not yet arrived. So there were these things happening in the 1930s and 1940s, even under the aegis of Lord Reith. So the first time the word homosexual appears on the BBC, as far as I can tell, is about 1937.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah, I know. I was a bit surprised. But by the 1950s, this has now become a real topic of discussion in terms of reform and decriminalisation. And that does begin to percolate through BBC thinking in the 1950s. And so, that's what excited me about it.
So there is a plan from here, is there? What's the future of this play?
Well, there are some more opportunities to see it. So we've just finished a tour for LGBT History Month in England, where we roamed around from Salford, Birmingham, Brighton, London, Liverpool, Loughborough, and then we've been lucky enough. Marcus managed to secure some more funding for us, so we'll be in Dublin as part of Wild Stages, which is their International Gay Theatre Festival, at the Teachers Club in Dublin from the 11th to the 16th of May. And then we will move on to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival from the 5th to the 16th of August, where we'll be part of the Assembly Room's performance spaces. So we're in one of their crate performance spaces from the 5th to the 16th of August there. So several performances in Dublin and Edinburgh forthcoming, and who knows where we'll go from there.
All of the performances have been funded so far by the Arts and Humanities Research Council, to which we're extremely grateful. And the next set of performances are being funded by the Higher Education Innovation Fund. So we're also deeply grateful to them too.
Wonderful. Well, with thanks to them, and thanks to you both for sparing the time to speak about it here on the podcast and for putting it together. It's just wonderful to see when history and drama collide and see what magic can come from that. Here's to many more collaborations like that. My thanks to Professor Marcus Collins and to Dr. Stephen Hornby. It's on tour. The BBC's First Homosexual. You can get your tickets. Link is in the show notes, linktr.ee/inkbrewtheatre, or you can Google the BBC's First Homosexual Dublin or Edinburgh to find tickets for that. Next time on the podcast, we're back in the 1920s. Not quite in our moment-by-moment timeline of 1923, because it's a centenary special or two, as we look at the general strike 100 years ago from next week. This was the making of Reith's BBC, but was the cost of its independence impartiality? Maybe we'll find out next time. Oh, and do come and see me on tour. An evening of very old radio plays Corsham in Wiltshire, Pound Arts Centre. That's Saturday the 2nd of May. And I'm at the Blakehay Theatre in Weston-super-Mare on Thursday the 4th of June. In talks to take the show to Gloucester as well later this year, and I would love to be in talks to take it to more places. I had a wonderful time recently at Chelmsford Theatre. Thank you if you came to that. And if you have a venue, a village hall, a church hall, a living room, to be honest, a group that you're part of, wherever you meet, I would be glad to be in touch about bringing an evening of very old radio to you. More details of the tour, paulkerensa.com/tour, link as ever in the show notes. The British Broadcasting Century is presented and produced by Paul Kerensa. Original music is by Will Farmer. This is not an official BBC podcast at all. We're just talking about ye olde BBC, and this is not made with the current BBC. But we salute them, and thanks to all who've preserved and treasured the archive and historical documents over the years. If you would like to rate and review this podcast, oh, we would so welcome it. This is a one-man band. We need all the help we can get. So wherever you found this podcast, give it a little review, why not? And do like it, and share it, and stay subscribed. Here to inform, educate and entertain. Do join us next time for the BBC and the General Strike of 1926, a centenary special here on the British Broadcasting Century.